Greetings to you, all seekers of the spooky, and thank you for checking out my video. Today what I've got for you is 61 movies I recommend watching through September and October. Now, this isn't a definitive list of the best 61 horror movies of all time or any nonsense like that. These are just 61 movies I love to watch around this time of year. There's a mild amount of thought to the layout of the list, just trying to keep styles from getting boring, so I do recommend watching in order, but hey, do whatever you want. Also, there's no rules to this, like one entry per franchise or anything like that. Just enjoy the movies, and if you disagree, feel free to put your own list in the comments, but I'm not going to read it because I don't care. Number 61, Night of the Living Dead, 1990. Starting off with a remake is bad form, but this is one of the best of all time. Tom Savini took the core elements of the Romero classic and turned it into something that's just so 90s. Even the opening titles just reminds me of watching Tales from the Crypt on Stolen HBO. Now, this movie has a cast of horror legends like Bill Moseley, Tony Todd, some great gore effects, and the whole thing just feels like a love letter to the genre. It's a fun time from beginning to end, and my preferred way to start the Halloween season. Number 60, Red State. Red State is arguably the last impressive movie made by Kevin Smith. He really nails that tone of the kind of primal fear you get from being held captive by a modern-day cult of religious extremists. Smith keeps the dialogue realistic and the story very grounded, for the most part, but overall this is a violent, intense, and terrifying film. Number 59, Jaws, the Sharksploitation edit. I've never really understood the appeal of like a creature feature. When people talk about movies like Godzilla or King Kong, like the horror movies, it never did anything for me. Now, none of this has to do with Jaws, but I just wanted to mention it while I had the platform. Jaws is both an iconic but kind of overrated movie in my opinion. Tone is all over the place, goes from horror to kind of a road trip movie, kind of like how the Jaws theme goes from being very broody to giddy at parts. It's just too jarring for my taste. The fan-made Sharksploitation edit fixes this by bringing the grindhouse aesthetic and using deleted scenes along with footage from other shark movies to lean into the absurd and over-the-top. It's everything I want in a killer shark movie, and it has Metallica in the soundtrack, so bonus points there. Number 58, The Last Exorcism. Now, I've seen a lot of found footage movies in my day, and admittedly, most of them are garbage, but I really appreciate the few gems that are out there. The Last Exorcism works so well by leaning away from the supernatural right out the gate, building a real world with a very likable main character in Cotton, and then constantly walking the line of credibility when the horror kicks in. Is this all mental illness or something more sinister? Moments of humor and levity fit naturally and keep the pace moving along smoothly as the movie builds up to its way over-the-top conclusion. Enjoy this one, but stay away from the sequel. I've tried to watch it on 3 separate occasions, and I just can't get past the first 10 minutes. It's trash. Number 57, Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers. It's hard to define what makes a good sequel, but regardless of what your criteria is, Sleepaway Camp 2 is the prime example of it. The first movie is a fairly conventional slasher with a ballsy twist. It's a trap! But for part 2, they decided to do my favorite thing and take the same premise and then explode cocaine all over it. More cheesy kills with a total 80s vibe. It's the best kind of VHS throwback killer in the woods movie. Number 56, American Psycho. So not to be one of those people, but American Psycho works a lot better as a book than it does a movie. The novel gives us a better insight into Bateman's steadily declining mental state and helps clear up any ambiguity about whether or not the events of the story are actually happening. What the book does not have, though, is Christian Bale looking like a chiseled god. It gets extra marks, too, for being directed by a woman, but not using any of the marketing to needlessly beat you over the head with that fact or sliding in over-the-top lines of dialogue to just remind you, yes, what he's doing is bad, and he's doing bad things to women. Truly, it was a more progressive time 20 years ago when this came out. Number 55, Phenomena. Had to include at least one giallo film on the list. Now, Suspiria is a lot of people's favorite for an Argento flick, and I can appreciate that. I dig the soundtrack, but Phenomena will always be my favorite. Granted, my path to finding the movie is a big part of my bias, though. As a kid, I loved the game Clock Tower on the original PlayStation, and then as a teenager, Found out that that was actually a sequel to a Japanese-only Super Nintendo game, also called Clock Tower, and then, through the wikiality of life, found out that game was heavily inspired by Phenomena. The design of Jennifer from the game is a straight take on Jennifer Connelly from the film, and there's a strong resemblance between Scissorman and the deformed child as well. Even without the game backstory, though, I do think the film stands on its own. Classic giallo tone, great music, and such a bizarre premise of using bugs to solve murders. Oh, and Donald Pleasance with a trained monkey, too. Number 54, Green Room. The older I get, the more difficult it becomes for a movie to really get a reaction out of me, but Green Room just manages to hit me in the gut every time. The director's previous film, Blue Ruin, also has hyper-realistic violence, but there's just something about the sound design and visual style that makes every cut and strike hurt so much more in Green Room. Very relatable premise of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a realistic escalation of events from there. This movie makes you feel like you're along with the band as they try to escape the skinheads, and it's nauseating and uncomfortable, but brilliantly done. Number 53, Videodrome. I love that feeling you get when you watch a Cronenberg movie. There's just something so unnatural about the worlds he builds and the way it draws you in as a viewer. Videodrome is probably the most meta example of this, as it literally pulls James Woods' character into the TV and us along with him. I can only imagine how much this movie must have really messed people up when it was released. Even years later, the themes of media addiction and becoming desensitized still hit at home. Also, Blondie's in the movie. That's neat. Number 52, Scream. Scream gets a lot of praise for dissecting horror tropes and bringing slashers back to the mainstream, and it totally deserves all that. The Ghostface character is arguably more recognizable to a casual audience than any other character in horror outside of maybe Jason. You see the masks from dollar stores to parody films to this very day. It spans sequels, reboots, TV series, and countless ripoffs. After being exposed to everything that came after it, it's kind of nostalgic going back to see where everything with Scream began and knowing what's going to happen after this first movie. Also, knowing David Arquette becomes a wrestler later in life is fun. Number 51, Alien. I've never understood the appeal of being an astronaut, and Alien may be to blame for that. Why would you want to be shot into space where you cannot stay alive for 60 seconds without layers of technology keeping you from freezing or suffocating, all while taking the risk of running into life forms you can barely comprehend, let alone try to defend yourself against? The pacing, cinematography, and set design make Alien feel like the worst kind of deep sleep nightmare plastered all over the screen, and I love it. Number 50, Paranormal Activity. And here is the big daddy that kicked off the found footage revival of the late 2000s. With the severely diminishing returns from all the sequels, it's easy to forget how effective the first Paranormal Activity was when it came out. I saw it in theaters multiple times where the audience was just frozen in terror for the last 10 minutes, and that's just not something you see anymore. The timing was just right, too, for this, since it coincided with the rise of YouTube found footage horror with series such as Marble Hornets. With all the distractions of watching a movie at home, it's hard to really get shut out of the real world and invested in the film, but if you can make it happen, the original Paranormal Activity is still worth the effort today. Number 49, a Serbian film. We're now entering what I call the Depression Duo portion of the list. Now, some people say the measure of a great horror film is how scared or uncomfortable the audience feels during it. Well, I can say from my own experience, most people are going to leave a Serbian film feeling like just absolute garbage. I can't ever really recommend watching this tale of a retired male porn star entering into the realm of extreme and experimental videos as a great movie night, but I have to respect how effective it is at making me feel miserable and disturbed. It does also get kudos, though, for being extremely graphic in content and story, but it's executed and presented like a quality film, not some straight-to-the-$5 bin garbage. So, good job, I guess? Number 48, Antichrist. Lars von Trier may be the most successful director in the game when it comes to capturing the essence of human woe on film. Melancholia may better express the existential dread of being alive, but I love the creepy imagery in Antichrist. You can feel the cold darkness of the foggy woods as you see the relationship between man and woman fall apart, escalate, and implode in horrifying anguish. Chaos reigns. Number 47, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. After being bummed out for multiple movies, figured it was time for some big top fun. It's hard not to smirk ear from ear when watching Killer Clowns. From the rockin' theme music, the colorful costume and set design, all the classic scenes, The movie's like a cotton candy sugar rush in the best kind of way. Just turn off your brain and enjoy the circus. Number 46, The Lodge. The next four movies all play with isolation in similar ways, but with their own horrifying results. Now, I almost wrote The Lodge off before giving it a real chance, and I'm really glad that I sat down and paid attention. The story stays interesting throughout as we guess along with the characters over what is really happening as they're freezing to death in their vacation home. It also plays with the concept of gaslighting without being overly preachy, but still having satisfying consequences. This is a relatively new one, but totally worth checking out. Number 45, The Shining. I don't really know what's left to say about The Shining that hasn't been said before. It's a masterpiece of atmosphere, full of interpretation spawning a bottomless pit of theories, and it's still unnerving to this day. Kubrick may have been an absolute monster to work with, but his films will far outlast any controversy. Also, he's super dead already, so just enjoy the movie for what it is. Number 44, Cabin Fever. Eli Roth hit the scene hard with Cabin Fever. It's definitely not a masterpiece and doesn't hold up in today's culture, but back in 2002, there was a lot to like about this movie. It's a throwback splatterfest with millennial sensibilities but legitimate craftsmanship behind it all. It's a bit of a tonal mess. There's some cringy dialogue and scenes that did not age well, but all in all, it's a fun time, like visiting your backwoods cousins that you only see around Christmas. Not in a sexual way, but it could be a sexual way. Number 43, The Black Coat's Daughter. We round out the isolation station with another slow burn, high tension thriller. My advice here is know as little as possible about this movie going in. No plot synopsis, no spoilers, no expectations. Let yourself be a fly on the wall and experience the story as it unfolds while trying to connect the dots along the way. This one definitely stuck with me after the first time I saw it, and still to this day has one of my top 10 scares of all time. Number 42, Maniac, 2012. The Maniac remake is just a great piece of filmmaking. I wasn't sure how I felt about the first-person gimmick, but as the movie went on and it was clear there was still an artistry to the cinematography, it won me over in a big way. Seeing the brutality of the violence not simply in first person, but from the true perspective of the killer, makes this one of the most unique and stylish slashers out there. Gotta also give huge points to Rob for the incredible soundtrack. Yes, the composer's name is just Rob. Good for him. Number 41, The Ring. The Ring on VHS has that meta-media feel that reminds me of reading House of Leaves on paperback. Actually sliding the tape into the VCR, knowing the plot of the movie, letting the VCR wind past the credits, and waiting for the cursed footage to surprise you again. It's just not something you get on a Blu-ray. The Ring is important for really starting the J-horror remake craze, but out of any of them, I respect The Ring for trying to create both the style of J-horror as well as the plot. Don't judge this one by its peers.